I'm interviewing Mr. Dominic Puli in St Albans, Victoria. It's Wednesday the 29th of August 1984. In which year were you born and what part of Malta or Gozo were you from?
I was born in Birkirkara on June the 7th, 1911.
And how long did you live in that part of Malta?
Well, till I was 16 years of age. I was just finished school, finishing intermediate at school, and then seeing that we were very poor and I had to go out to work, I decided to join my brother in Australia.
And did you come from a large family in Malta?
11 children we were, 11 altogether. And mum and dad, of course.
What were your parents' occupations?
Well, my father was in the army. He was a sergeant in the army. And really, he was in the army all his life. And his wages were very, very poor, around about 35 shillings a week.
And mother was a housewife?
In her house.
You mentioned your schooling. How old were you when you started school, and how far did you go?
Well, I started at the age of 5 and went up to intermediate. Passed the primary school and then went to a private school up to the intermediate.
And what did you learn at school? I believe languages were taught.
Well, we learned, of course, the usual English and Italian. I can speak Italian too.
And were there technical subjects taught as well?
Such as what?
Oh, trades or...
No, there was no such as trades or nothing like that, no, only schooling.
What was your... Did you ever have a full-time job in Malta?
No, I used to work after I left school, really. I had about 6 months working as an assistant clerk with the Wembley store in Valletta, which was the largest store then that existed in the city. And the wages were about 8 shillings a week.
And were they... You were still living at home at that stage?
I was still living at home, yeah.
And did you have any other jobs before emigrating?
No. I was too young, really.
And you left Malta in 1928?
That's right.
Could you say something about the reasons?
Well, certainly. My brother was here 2 years before me, and he was a fitter and turner working for Mt Lyell at Queenstown, Tasmania, on the west coast. And he was earning £4 a week. And seeing that I was earning 8 shillings and he's earning £4 a week, that was quite a lot of money. And also, looking at the family being so poor, just we ordinary family, only one bread earner, which was my father. So I decided to leave to Australia, but I had no money. So I had to borrow every penny to come over here.
When you talk about life being poor in Malta, can you give examples?
Well, you take an average Australian person today, or family in Australia, say they're earning $250 a week, and they got 8 or 10 children like we had. Would you consider that poor, or what would you consider that? Well, something similar on that scale of today.
So there would have been a lot of talk about immigration in those days?
It always has been there, like for many, many years. Our grandfathers and our uncles, that during 1911, they emigrated to Australia. And I remember where the first group that came before me, they couldn't read or write. They had to have an interpreter with them so they can go to places or do things. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to survive.
I was going to ask if you knew of any Maltese people who had emigrated before 1928. Were these friends or family? Or?
Well, say neighbors and people that we knew, that used to work in their little pot of ground and they couldn't survive, and they decided to come to Australia to try and make a living or better themselves.
And then would they write back home and you would hear how things were going?
They used to write very, very sort of short letters, and used to take 3 or 4 months before they get a letter. First of all, the trip used to take about 6 weeks for a letter to go, you know. And they couldn't write or read, so they had to depend on somebody that can write and read, so they can write to their families.
And what sort of image did people in Malta have of Australia? Like, was it a positive image?
Well, they had, first of all, it always has been told that Australia was a big bush country, and all you're going to go there and see only black fellas, Aborigines and things like that. Matter of fact, this is very interesting asking me this question, because when we came here, and this is in 1928, we're allowed to shoot black fellas on sight. You did not have to have a permit to have a gun or a knife or anything like that. And we are told that if we been caught in the bush or anywhere where we see a black fella, we should shoot him and then report it to the... I remember that as clear as today.
Who told you that?
Well, it was a general... It was a general thing, you see, that you see a black fella, don't give him a chance to attack you, you shoot him, and then report it to the police.
And, so that would have been the image of most people, including yourself,
yeah.
Your impression of...
And there's another thing would be interesting to know. When I came here, those that call themselves Australian, the white Australians, people that emigrated in the first place to Australia, I consider myself that they were selfish themselves. You say why? Because an immigrant, whether it's an Italian, Maltese, Greek, or any other person that came from overseas, and especially the Poms, if they go out in the street on their own, they can attack you and punch you and go you and all that. That was what you call the white Australian. They were really savages. Matter of fact, we Maltese never went out at night, whether to a picture show or something, without being 2 or 3 together. In case we were attacked, we just have him. And the first thing I learned when I came here at the age of 16, there were a couple of friends of ours, Maltese, they were boxers. And the first thing they taught me is how to box and fight, to be able to protect myself against, not the Aboriginal, but against the Australians themselves.
Did you ever need to use that boxing skill?
Once. And really, I was insulted on the job. I was called a black dago bastard. And I got that offended that I couldn't touch him on the job because I would have lost my job. Never mind whether I was in the right or wrong. As a European, I would have lost the job, not the Australian. But then I met him in the street and gave him a good hide and right in the middle of the street. And ever since then, he was a great friend of mine. We finished up very great friends. That's true.
Yeah, I've heard a few stories like that, actually. So, going back to Malta again, do you recall when you first heard of Australia? I know it was a long time ago. But
no. Well, naturally, when my brother left the dockyard to come to Australia, of course, then we used to get letters frequently. We practically used to get about 2 or 3 letters a month. And of course, that encouraged me to go there. And after he telling us about the amount of food that there is here, the cheap food and the high wages. You see, in Malta, the wages at that time was about 17 shillings to a guinea a week. 70 shillings for laboring, and guinea will be about for a tradesman, carpenters or builder, something like that. So, seeing that he was getting £4 a week, that encouraged me more. And
what part of Australia was he?
He's in Tasmania.
He was in Tasmania?
On the west coast, in Queenstown. Probably you would like to ask, which will be very interesting in general, why did my brother came to Australia? That would be very interesting. And Well, he used to work at the dockyard as field turner. Now, in the old times, when he started there, it used to be that if you serve your time, you go in by exam from school and serve your time and become a tradesman, whatever trade it is, which he was fit and turner. They were not supposed to put you off, unless, of course, you do something wrong. And he started 4 shillings a week. By the time he served his 6 years time, not 5 years, at that time used to be, you had to serve 6 years. Every year, he used to have an increase of, say, another 4 shillings. And he finished up earning £2, 4 shillings a week when he finishes term, with his service. And with that £2, 4 shillings a week, my father's wages, we were living very comfortably. And my father sacrificed himself to make sure that he gets through his exams, extra schooling, and all that sort of thing. And after 6 months that he was earning the full wages, they gave him an honorable discharge because they reckoned there was no work. Now that was against the law at the time there. And when my father saw this paper saying that he's finished because there was no work, but they gave him a job to go to Queenstown, Tasmania.
They gave him the job in Malta.
From Malta. That. But the hard part of it is that we suffered quite a lot by my brother losing his job and had to be sent to Australia. Now, the hard part of this too, as soon as he was sent to Australia, another Englishman comes from England to take his job. And we consider that was rotten. And up to today, I never forget that day when I saw my father crying with tears in his eyes because he knew that we had to go to the struggle again. And I have to speak the truth. After that, really, I hated Malta, England, and everything. I said, I'm off to Australia. And that is the honest truth. I could never forget that day.
So that would have been 1926, was it?
It'd be around about 1926, 27. Soon about 27. That's...
So the decision for you to emigrate didn't involve a great deal of, you didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it.
No, as soon as I seen what happened to my brother, I said, what are we here? And then, so that he came here to Australia, he's making that money. He praised Australia as far as food and stuff is concerned. He never mentioned anything about Aboriginals or what the life of Australia is like. All he said, he earning money, he was sending money home to help us. He always sent half his wages to help us. And that made my decision to pack up and leave.
So he was important to the breadwinning of the family, was he? He was the oldest of the...
He is the oldest, and he is very important. With his help, we'll live it again.
What was his name?
Angelo.
Angelo.
Mm.
Well, by the way, was there a family nickname?
Puli. P-U-L-I. Puli. We didn't have a nickname. They used to call us Puli's family.
So your brother would have been the main source of information about Australia?
He was the information, the only information that I had.
Did you ever meet Australians in Malta?
No. English, yes. English people, but not Maltese. Not Australians. I don't think at that time there was any.
I know that during the war, World War I, there were there were 3,000 actually treated, from Gallipoli.
Oh, probably that, but
hospital,
I would be too young then.
Yeah, yes.
Be about 7 years of age.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't know any.
So you were 16 when you left for Australia.
That's right.
Do you remember the name of the ship on which you travelled?
Yes. When my brother came out here, and the first people that come to Australia, they had to go to Naples on a ferry and pick up a boat from there. But after the First World War, England built 4 ships, which they used to call the bay boats. It was one-class service, and they used to go from England, take the passengers from England to Australia, and then come to Malta and pick up anybody else that's going to Australia from Malta. And that was very handy. Now, the 4 boats were the Larks Bay, Morton's Bay, Experience Bay, and they had another one named the Baradeen. And I came on the Baradeen. They were 14,000 tonnage ships. They're lovely ships, and one-class service was very good.
So there would have been a few hundred passengers on board.
Oh yes, it used to be full all the time. And they cut the trip down. Well, it used to take 6 weeks to come to Australia. It took only 33 days, and we reckon that was a very speedy trip.
Yes.
At the time.
Were there many other Maltese people on board?
Yeah, there would be, when I came in there was about 150 Maltese.
And,
a lot of them going to Queensland for farming, cane farming and all that.
Were there groups together, like from the same village, or mates, you know?
Well, those that were going to the same village, they used to get together and stick together and all that sort of thing. But the style of Maltese at that time was entirely different than today. We were all like brothers. When you say you're a Maltese, like you get your own brother. Today they're hardly know each other. But at that time, we were like one family. Now, if you're working and you got a place, and there's another Maltese not working, he walks into that house like if it's your own brother, and he eats with you and sleep there. If he hasn't got anywhere to sleep, we were all like that at the time. We're like one big family.
I know it's a long time ago, but do you remember any of the individual people you travelled with from Malta? You know, what was their story? Why were they leaving? Where were they going?
Well, they were all on the same idea, to earn that extra pound to survive, because Malta was very poor. Work, there was none. And if you're working, you're only getting 17 shillings a week, which hardly enough to live on. And they were all on about the same story, going to Australia to make an extra quid, you know, and all that sort of thing.
Am I right in thinking they all would have had relatives here or friends, Maltese friends?
No, some of them had, some haven't, you know. Some amalgamated with others. Mostly went to Queensland for the sugar cane because it was hard work and they were making big money. Where we're making, we say, £4 a week here, they could easily make £10 a week, £12 a week.
So they weren't all headed for the same port, obviously. How many... Did you disembark at Melbourne?
I disembarked in Melbourne, yeah. And we only stayed 2 days. In Melbourne, my brother came to meet me from Tasmania, and he gave me a good look around about the city, which I remember it was only about half the size what it is today. There was not such a thing as skyscrapers and things like that. Probably 8-story was the highest building that ever been. I seen buildings in Melbourne going up and down 3 times. They build them, erect them again after years, go up. I seen 3 times going up and down. And I can mention the MLC, one of them, that went up 3 times since I've been in Australia. I remember the Australia Hotel, and quite a lot of buildings at Melbourne, the main buildings. I remember them all.
I'd like to ask now about the emigration procedure in Malta. Once you'd made up your mind, what happened then?
Well, there was Captain Colmy. He was the in charge of the immigration at the time.
But in Malta?
In Malta. And then afterwards he was sent to Australia as the Maltese consular to look after the Maltese in Australia. I knew him personally. He was a very, very nice man. And he's got a son here now, a solicitor. Yeah, Edward. He's very, very nice, nice people. Well, all you had to do is you had to pass really few words in English, whether you can say no and yes and thank you. And you had to have £10 rather, to put deposit before you land in Australia, so you don't land broke. You see? Matter of fact, I had to borrow £40, which covered my fare of £29 from Australia to here. That was the full fare. And I kept £1 in my pocket in case if I wanted something on board. Of course, £1 was a lot of money then. And I still remember that all I spent out of that pound in 33 days was 2 and 6. I also had £10 which I deposited as a bond before I left Malta. So when I get to Australia, I won't be broke. Now, all this money they had, it was given to, really, I borrowed it. £20 my uncle gave me, who is Dr. Abrams Galia, his father, who's well known today in Malta. He's a specialist, brain specialist. And the other £20 came from a businessman that used to sell clothes to us. He lent me the money. And when I said to him, I said, now, how about my father comes and sign for it, you know? He said, you go away. He said, I'm lending this money to you. He said, I don't want any signatures. He said, you go there. He said, and don't send me the money unless you have plenty. And that's how we were known in Malta. And I felt myself very, very proud. And of course, I worked hard when I came here, saved every penny I could, and I thank God I paid everybody in about 6 months.
Regarding the emigration procedure, again, did they pay much attention to the language? Was there a language test?
No, I believe later on after us, a few years after we came, there was such a thing that you had to be able to speak few words in English. But at my time, as long as you can say yes and no and few little words like that, there was no problem at all.
What about the health medical examination?
Oh, well, medical, of course. You have to be fit. Like if you got any serious trouble, you wouldn't get through.
What were they looking for, though, with the medical examination?
That you're healthy, your inner health, you say, strong enough that you can work, because they knew the life in Australia at the time. You're talking at times when where we're standing here today, I remember coming here for rabbits. Where we're standing here now, and today's a city, isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember that Sunshine as a bush. Of course, when you mention St Albans, Keel and that area, it's like you're talking in central Australia today. The city was the city itself, and when you say West Melbourne, North Melbourne, Richmond or Collingwood, they were all suburbs. They are practically in the bush. When you talk Sunshine, I remember Sunshine when there was only a platform for a station, there was only one store. And you know how the city of Shanghai, how big it is today, one store and the paper block. I remember that.
When would that have been?
Well, around 28, 29, 30.
What belongings did you bring with you on the trip from Malta?
Only my clothes, which there again, the same chap, the same gentleman that lent me the £20 to come out here, also gave me the clothes, few underwears, and one suit, 2 shirts, and a blanket, which it was added to his £20, which I sent over to him, as I told you, within 6 months. But if he didn't give me that, I would have had nothing to come over here. We were really poor. We've never been hungry or cold, but we were poor as far as we had no carpets on the floor, and not like we have here in Australia.
And so the route of the voyage, am I correct in saying would be through Suez Canal?
Oh, through Suez, yes. Mediterranean Sea, Suez Canal, Red Sea, go to, then was Singapore, which is, they changed its name today. We went there, and then we went to Perth, then Fremantle, which is the same area there, and then Melbourne, then from Melbourne to Tasmania.
Did anybody disembark at Fremantle, any of the Maltese?
The few, very few. It's really, we say about 10% went to Fremantle. Few landed in Melbourne. I think there were about 6 of us landed. And there is all for Queensland. They went to Queensland.
Oh, do you recall what the Fremantle people were going to? Like, did they have...
No, I was too young to be worrying about asking these questions. And I mean, all we were that as soon as they leave the boat, I felt like I lost my brothers again. We were all like one family. You see, if one gets into trouble at the time, all the others hop in. Whether physically or whether food or whether housing or things like that, if anybody get into any sort of trouble like that, the other Maltese help. We're like one big family.
What about the trip itself? Were there any problems, with accommodation or food on the voyage?
No, we had a accommodation similar to anybody else. And as a matter of fact, I was very lucky because my cabin, the one that I was booked to go in, it was filled up. And then the captain of the boat came and saw me. Oh, he said, "Young, can I give you a good cabin?" He gave me a cabin on top. I was very lucky. And he was a very nice chap, and he said to me, he said, "Don't worry." He says, "Look, we've got a nice cabin up here." He says, "2-berth cabin." He said, "We can put you in there." And I had a cabin on a deck.
And the food was...
It was only one-class service. The food was very good. Well, the first time in my life that I had pineapple for a start. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what pineapple was, and they gave me, I loved it, and all. I said, "What is this? Where is this grown?" "Well, it's grown in Australia, up in Queensland, and all that sort of thing." It was very interesting, yeah.
Was there a priest on board, a Maltese priest?
No, not at that time. They were too frightened to leave Malta, I think, at the time.
Again, I know it's a long time ago, but do you remember what happened on the very first day in Melbourne when you disembarked
Yeah.
on the ship?
Well, first of all, I'm very excited to see my brother, and we hugged each other, like if we haven't seen each other for about 50 years. And then he said, "I'm going to take you to lunch." He said, "in one of the finest hotels." And that was the Savoy Plaza. I still remember the place. And it used to be called the Alexandria. He said, "I'm taking you there because the cook is a Maltese." He said, "And I know him." He said, "He's a friend of mine, and I'm sure we'll have a good meal." And I said, "Well, look, brother, I said, better to look after the money because we can't afford it." He said, "Today's special day." We went there. And the next thing, they give us a nice 3-course meal. And he said, the young lady that served us, she said, "What would you like to drink?" I said, "I would like to have a nice glass of wine, Australian wine." And she looked at me with sharp eyes. And my brother kicked me, said, "Tea or coffee?" I said, "What, tea or coffee with my main meal?" I said, "No, thanks." She said, I said, "Nothing." He said, "Here is not like Malta, you have drink with..." That is... And I still remember the day, and anyhow, he had coffee, I believe, and I didn't have anything because I couldn't drink tea or coffee with my main meal. We usually in Malta have tea in the morning or in the afternoon, but not with meals. With meals always wine. And I was still, that of course after a while, I got used to it and forgot about the drinking wine and get on the tea, and I enjoyed it.
Did you meet any of the Maltese community in Melbourne? I know you were only here.
A few. I met different. We only spent 2 days, and my brother wanted to show me everything. And I still remember the cable tram. They used to have the cable underground. And I could never forget that day because he said, my brother said to me, he said, "Look, ride in the front to see a bit of Melbourne." And it was a cold day, and my job, I froze. But it was still, I believe they still got them in San Francisco, America, the cable tram. We were the second country in the world that took them off. I remember them well.
So with the Maltese people who were in Melbourne at that time, who you met in those few days, where were they? Were they living in a particular area, or?
Well, mostly West Melbourne, North Melbourne, in that area. Few in Collingwood, very few. And in Fitzroy, but most of it was not working, you see, and they used to meet opposite St. Francis. There used to be a Maltese club in there, and they used to meet all there, and if anybody didn't have any breakfast and that bloke had 2 shillings in his pocket, he said, "Have a coffee." I remember that well.
That was in King Street, was
No, it was in Lonsdale Street, isn't it, opposite St. Francis? Lonsdale Street. The building is pulled down now, and Myers put the new building up.
When you say Maltese Club, was it called the Maltese Club, or was it just a...
Known as the Maltese Club. There was a chappie there, used to take bets on the side, you know, and the bets at the time used to be shilling, 2 shillings, you know, mostly 10 shillings at the most if you can afford it. But they used to make a living, and they used to just live, and that's all.
I believe there was a barber too who helped when you were right. It was Tony, the barber in, where was it, William Street or King Street?
King Street, yeah. I remember him, yeah. A haircut was 3 pence, that is 3 cents. And if you have a haircut and a shave, he'll charge you 5 pence. Otherwise, if you want a shave, it costs you 3 pennies. If you want a haircut, it's 3 pennies. But if you have haircut and a shave, it's 5 pennies. I remember that well.
And do you remember any of the individuals who you met here? Like,
well,
what were they employed as if they were working? And,
mostly labourers, pick and shovel. Especially when there is a building going up. I remember the Commonwealth Bank up in Burke Street, right up on top. Going up there, that was built practically by the Maltese. All pick and shovel work, and they used to work hard, I'll tell you something. There wasn't such a thing as the modern machinery to dig and all that. It was all pick and shovel stuff. And you had to be fit and strong to work there.
Is that the bank in Elizabeth Street? Or?
No, I think it's in the one in Burke Street, right up top.
I know.
You know, that brown, really great type of marble, isn't it, or something?
I know.
I remember that going up. I know that used to be the Roxy Theatre. There was a picture theatre there. It used to cost, we used to call it the Flea Theatre because it was only threepence to go in. And they used to call it the Flea Theatre because it's a cheap theatre. But people couldn't afford to go anywhere, and they used to go there. Matter of fact, I remember Bob Dyer, the TV celebrity. Remember him?
Yes, yes.
Playing in them theatres. On the stage his ukulele and sing. And most of the people used to go and see him because he was very, very funny when he was young, you know. He really was, I remember him. That before he became a big celebrity, pick a box and all this sort of thing on television. He was a very nice man too. He was very, he could never, he used to work hard, and the more the people clap their hands and sings again and all that, he was really a good man.
Well, I suppose being the Depression years, people would have needed that sort of morale boosting and entertainment. How did were there many unemployed people in the Maltese community in that?
Oh, quite a lot, you could say.
See, what would they say?
Well, they used to live mostly with each other, or they might do little odd jobs where they can get, we say, 5 or 6 shillings, you know, and that they used to stretch that 6 shillings in having something light to eat or something like that, but it was very bad. I would say that 75% of the Maltese were unemployed here in Victoria.
Were there particular boarding houses, say, run by Maltese?
No. There wasn't such a thing. There were a lot of houses where people used to take single people like that, give them a room for about, we say, 4 shillings a week. You see, and use of the room, and they probably have a little kitchenette where they can cook if they want to. But that's all. And they had to do all their own work.
I believe those who did have jobs often worked down the wharves in those years.
Quite a few of them that worked on that, and they were the best jobs because there was big money in there. When I call big money, you're not talking the money of today. But the big money, what you earning, would say, it's always triple your wages. If you're earning £4, you like to get 12 or 15 pounds a week, which was a lot of money then. Matter of fact, in 1933, I had to contact myself at Mt Lyell, and I was in charge of the, what they call it, shaft at Lola mine. And I was in charge of all the timber in it, to put it all down. Well, I was earning At the time, £2 and a day, I'm sorry, £2 and a day, which was tremendously big money. I made all the money in 9 months and passed off again. Went back to Tasmania.
Why did you left Tasmania then?
Well, I'll get to that.
For a bit of a change. I went just for a bit of change to see the different part of the country. My brother was still running the pictures, and I said, well, I'm going up there to see this place instead of going for a holiday and spend the money. You see, the scheme was always that when you go somewhere, take a job, make some money, and go back. And I had the experience. I gained quite a lot of experience, and then went back to Tasmania.
So when you left Malta, did you regard it as a permanent move?
Well, at the time, I wasn't quite sure of what I'm going to see, how I'm going to settle down. But I got homesick at the time, and in 1935 I went back to Malta. And I was thrilled because I went for the Feast of St Helen in Birkirkara, and the chappie that lended me some money and the clothes, they used to sell us clothes, was that pleased to see me. And in the feast, I had to stay there with them to see the procession from their gallery, and they used to have galleria, what they used to call it.
Balcony.
Yeah, balcony. But they used to call it Maltese gallery, isn't it? Something like that. And I stayed there with them and one thing another. And he was so pleased to see me, and that, you know, he couldn't do enough for me while I was over there. I went there and stayed 3 months and went back.
3 months. Why did you not return for a longer period? Like, you only went back out of sickness.
I wanted to see, so you get homesick, really. And then I want to see my mother and my people, and, you know, you want to see your country. But after spending there 3 months, and saw exactly what was there and what I left behind me, I said, I'll never come back to Malta again. I said, Australia will do me, you know. And that's how you get on. So the second time, when I went there in 1933, I was excited about going back home and seeing all that. But then when I saw the same thing that I left behind me, I said, Australia, it's heaven in comparison. You're never short of anything. Anything you want is cheap, good wages, having fun, all that sort of thing, you know. And I said, oh, I'll never come back.
Did you return with your brother?
No, on my own. I just went for two. We couldn't say two of us go at a time because we had to run the pictures and somebody had to be there while the other person, see, if the other brothers went, say, for holiday to Sydney, well, I couldn't leave. I had to be there, so we used to take it in turn where to go, you see.
Well, I must ask, what jobs did you have after you arrived?
When I was working in the underground, and the first thing they gave me was pick and shovel.
This was in Tasmania?
In Tasmania.
So,
and
from Melbourne, you were in Melbourne only a few days?
2 days.
Went to Tasmania?
Yeah,
by
straight
ferry
away. Yeah,
with,
we went by ferry, and then we had the train. We went on the train from Burnie to Queenstown, which takes a full day. And then after a couple of days, I got this job. My brother got me the job into there. And I can tell you this, that the pick and shovel was heavier than I was at the time. You know, I was only a bit of a kid. And I cried, you know, because I never seen a pick and shovel in my life before. I didn't know what it was. And luckily, you know, there was another Italian chap working on the same job, an Australian. He was very, very nice, this particular Australian. And they helped me because I nearly left the job. And they said, stick to it. Might be a bit hard now, he said, but it'll make you. And it's true. Because after that, of course, as I told you, I went to, took a course in carpentry, and I started learning building and all that sort of thing, and we opened the pictures, and I kept forward all the time. I never looked back.
This was in Queenstown?
In Queenstown, Tasmania.
Then you were with Mt Lyell Mining Company?
All the time, yeah.
What were the...
We used to work during the day, of course, and show pictures at night. You see? During the day we used to go to work and show pictures at night. All that.
Did your brother have that job lined up for you before you arrived?
No, when I came here, of course he, then in 2 years before me, he knew all about people and things like that, and he probably had inquired. I don't know that he did or not, but I knew that within a week I had a job.
And was there a Maltese community in Queenstown?
We would be about 50 Maltese there.
All working for the mines?
All working for mines, different places. Some work in the smelters, and some work on the what they call the crusher. That's what they break all the rocks. Other works on timber, cutting timber ready for the mines. Others were timbermen, just building up. When they sort of dig the ground, they put timber for safety and all that sort of work. That's what they call a timberman.
And as a community, was it closely knit? Like,
Oh,
was
yes.
place
Yeah. Well, they usually used to come to our place, and when we started the pictures, of course, we had a big hall in the back of the pictures where they used to come there and have a game of cards or spend the afternoon there or have a meal there, you know, everybody start cooking, you know. We was like one family, like if you go to your own father and he was not there, what would you go and make a steak on the grill, you grill a steak and eat it. It was the same. It was really a good family, you could say.
And where did you live in Queenstown? Like, did you rent a place?
No, well, in the beginning, as I told you, we bought our own place. We never paid the rent. And then when we had this hall business, we had, it was quite a big place, and at the back we had a lot of dressing rooms and things like that, which if there's anything on the stage, they use that. Well, we used them as bedrooms. We done them all up, and we had our own bedrooms around the premises.
You actually introduced the talkie pictures, did you, to Tasmania?
Well, on the west coast, in Queenstown with it, the first RCA photophone system that went to Queenstown was ours. And that was the first machine, RCA machine, because there was Western Electric and RCA, but the first RCA photophone system that went to Tasmania, it was ours. That was on the west coast.
And which year was that?
Around about 1928 Christmas.
And how did you, in the first place, how were you involved in the movies and showing films?
As I told you earlier, we could never stand still. And when I saw the pictures here, when I saw the movies here, the first day I arrived in Melbourne, sort of it got into me, and I said, what a wonderful thing. And I wanted to learn more about it. And the elder brother and I, we talked it over and over again. I said, wouldn't it be lovely if we had a hall here and we ran them down here. So we saw this old hall, belonged to a very elderly gentleman, and he practically let us have it for nothing. I think he started with about 5 shillings a week. He said, will you do all right? You pay me 5 shillings a week? He said, then if you want to pay me a bit more, that's up to you. And we done it up ourselves and all the painting or this. And we bought the seating of the Regent Theatre. You know the Regent Theatre? This used to be the Regent. They were changing the seating, and my brother found out in the paper that they were for sale. And we went there together. It used to cost £2.10 a return trip from either Burney or Launceston to Melbourne. That was used to cost the trip on the ferry. And we went there and bought all the seating, delivered on Queenstown for 2 shillings and 6 each. We paid for them, and a shilling to lend them in Queenstown. They were the same seat today. I don't think you can get under $100 a seat, just to give you the idea. But they were changing. They used to have to change the seats and keep the people coming to the pictures, make different seating and all that. And that seat, the Regent Theatre seats, in 1928, late 1928, we bought them for 2 and 6 each. And they said, you don't have to pay cash for them. We'll send them over to you. They said, then pay us as you like. because they knew we were in the film business. And once you're in the film, you become a clique. And the live in pictures, it's tremendous. We used to, occasionally they make a picture of Australian pictures. So they used to send us an invitation to go and see it. And I saw 2 of George Wallace pictures, the old George Wallace, remember them? If I was a policeman. And a couple of more, when it was just finished and they were trying to sort of fix it up. We were in Sydney and they took us to see it, and you could see, that's why I told you about the pictures, the sound is about 18 inches difference. You could see the movies and hear the sound after. When I remember when my brother and I were invited to see this picture, just before it even was edited, you know, they used to edit it and all that sort of thing, but before it was edited, I remember seeing these pictures there, and they used to take us everywhere. It was tremendous. The building in Sydney, I remember, it was the only building in the city that had a swimming pool right up on top. And matter of fact, we went, saw the pictures first inside the building, then we had something to eat, and then we had for a swim. Heated swimming pool up on the building. It was the only one. It was famous at the time. I forgot the name of it. They had pictures here. Australia made quite a lot of pictures. The Sentimental Bloke, which we showed in our own theatre. The Silence of the Maitland, which is a famous picture. They brought a star from England to star in that. And they quite a lot. Then they done the, George Wallace, of course, was star coming into the pictures in that time. And they used to make quite good pictures, very good classes goes in the world at the time. I think myself that Australians had the talent of pictures. So if you look at them today, the Man from Snowy River and all these type of pictures from they winning word name, aren't they? No. I also remember, I think, which I got a film on, TV film, the first day that the surveyor went to put the first peg for the Sydney bridge. I was there on the first day that the surveyor were there to put the first peg. I saw him there to start setting up for the bridge. And then I was there again when the arch was joined like that. Matter of fact, there was a big story at the time. It was only about 8 feet away, which is nothing. You see, they started both ends. And when they met, it was only about 8 feet different, which is practically perfect. And the chappie that was on top, joining the 2 arcs together, he dropped his spanner, and there was a boat coming down under it on the same time. And the captain was looking up, and the spanner landed next to his feet. If it hit him on the head, it would have gone through him. You can imagine that high. There was a big write-up in the paper. As a matter of fact, I think I still got the piece of paper. And he gold-plated it and kept it in the. He kept it in his. Yeah, that fell right within inches of his feet. You can imagine that when they were joining that arch.
What was the name of your theatre in?
Well, in the old place, the first house that we opened was the Olympia Theatre, and then we went into another place. We built by somebody else, and we bought it off. And they used to run a skating ring in it. It was a solid concrete job, you see.
Is this still in Tasmania?
In Tasmania, it's in the same place, in North Street. It's still there, but the building is still there. I went there about 3 months ago, the wife and I, and went through it and had quite a lot of pictures of it. But as good as the first day we had it.
Well, which building is this?
It was the new Capitol. Then we put the new Capitol on. That was a new name.
Yeah.
First we had the Olympia Theatre, and then we went into something called the new Capitol, after the capital of Melbourne. And we used to do quite well. And during the week, we used to run skating rink. We had a fourth floor, another fourth floor. So it was a very big place. And we used to join, which we built ourselves. Everything was done by us. We join them together and run the skating rink. It was on a Wednesday. And if there is a ball, we used to have run the ball there and everything, and fancy dress ball. And we really was center of Queenstown for entertainment. We had a lot of fun.
So how long were you in Queenstown?
Well, I spent there till about, left there 36, 35, something like that. And then I went to New Zealand. And from New Zealand, then I went to, you see, my idea was to travel around and see the world. But I wanted to work in a place and go, and my intention was to go to New Zealand and go Fiji, then keep going, go to America and all, then come back more, and then come back to Australia. That was my idea as a young fella, you know, I always wanted to travel. And I went to New Zealand in 1935, and I never had a steady girlfriend. I never had any intention of getting married. And then I went to Fiji Islands, and I met up in Lautoka. I met the manager that I worked for, that I made the contract for in Mount Isa, and he said, "What you doing here?" Oh, I said, looking around. I said, "I'm going round to see the world." He said, "Well, stay here." He said, "Come work for us." I said, "Well, not more than 3 months." And I think I spent about 6 months. I done a job for him there. And then there was this, went back to New Zealand, and the war started. In New Zealand, I met my wife. And we went steady, you know, and all that. And I thought, my God, I said, this is like the Maltese people here. Quiet and never worry about going anywhere and all that. And I was working there for a big firm. I was foreman on the first housing scheme in Lower Hutt and Upper Hutt and Wellington, in that area. Then I went to Christchurch just before I met my wife. And they gave me a foreman job in Christchurch. And then the war broke out. And I was going with my wife, was going with her for about 18 months. And, you know, I was always worried about whether my people getting killed or anything like that during the war. And I said, look, I said, I'm not going to stay here because conscription is coming in New Zealand. I want to stay here. I don't want to go to war. I said, who started? That's to be straightforward. Who started and finish it? I said that, and still, when the war broke out, it reminded me, I don't know how, when my brother was sacked from the dockyard for no reason at all, but to be replaced by somebody else. And I said, that's how I felt, and there's nothing to be honest, not to be honest about it. I said, well, if that's the type of country I want to fight, I don't want to fight for nobody. So I came back to Australia, got married, and we came back to, and that was 1940. And we raised 8 children. I got 6 boys and 2 girls, and they're all doing well, thanks God, you know, they're all doing all right. And I got 17 grandchildren today, and they're terrific. And you come on the weekend here, there's always 2 or 3 of them. You see, I love them. And
do your children speak Maltese?
none of them. They might say a word or two, you know, but you see, in the early stages in 1940, I started on my own in building. I was working for A. Watts. I was foreman with him, and during the war there was a lot of war work, you see, to be done. And then on the weekends I used to go to Werribee and start building on my own for Italian farmers and things like that. And that's why I could speak a lot more Italian, you know, and things else, because I used to be amongst them. And I built for him, then I started my own business. And really, I didn't spend much time with the children teaching them Maltese.
Yes.
I hardly see them. You know, when you're starting in life, not like today. Well, I spend a lot of time with my grandchildren today. You see, most of my time is spent with them, taking them places and doing things with them. Now, if we send this young chap to America, as I told you, I'll be going there for 2 or 3 times in that year. Oh yeah, I see him.
Can I return to Queenstown for a question regarding the Maltese in Queenstown in those years? Were they a settled group? Like, was it a community that was stable, or did you find eventually
No, they were very stable. They were very stable because they knew there was no other work anywhere else. They had their family there, they reared their family. And there was all like being a Maltese village where you could see John, and you can see Jack, and you can see Peter, and go there and meet occasion on a Sunday, and we have a bit of a chat, you know. It was like, oh, they were settled, all right.
Do you know if any of those that were there in those days are still alive and living?
Well, unfortunately not, because I went there about, as I told you, 3 months ago, the wife and we went to New Zealand to a wedding of one of my wife's family. And then I said, now while we're here, I want to spend a month at least, or 6 weeks in Tasmania. So we've flown from Christchurch to Hobart. And we went round and everything, and I got a nephew there, which I met. But even in Queenstown, I went there, and when I made myself know who I was, they gave me the red carpet. And I, being a Rotarian, of course, at the Rotary Club, they made a big fuss about it, and they sort of mentioned people of my time. People would say, the chap that we used to buy the clothes from, his grandson is handling the business now. So he's a Rotarian too, and when I mentioned who I was and showed certain pictures, they did the same. They showed me pictures of their grandfather and all that, which were mates with me. See, today I'm 73 years of age, you know, it's not, and spending 56 years in Australia is that. I remember, I'll tell you, coming here, you couldn't get through here with a bicycle. Where we're standing, the trees and everything was bush. Deer Park. You could easily find a deer occasionally. That's how it was. So all this area was not one big bush.
So when did you first come here to this area?
Well, in 1959, I decided to retire. I sold my business in Werribee, my building and hardware supplies and all that sort of thing. I sort of had enough. And then we bought this property in Richmond, on the hill. And beautiful property. And then we went there, and the kids were going to university in different schools, different colleges. And I got sick and tired of doing nothing. So I came here to there was a Keatman Proprietary Limited, an old estate agent. He said, come and look after my office in there. He had 8 offices. You know, I was introduced to him, and he said, what are you doing? I said, nothing. I said, I'm sick and tired of doing nothing too. He said, go on. Then I found out that the office he had here, they never sold a house in 6 months. And the first week I went there, I sold 2 houses, 3 blocks of land in 1 week. And he couldn't make it out. And then I put a proposition to him that I did not sort of want to work. I never worked for anybody, with the exception of in the early stages. I said, I would like to be a partner with you. Oh, no, there's no question. I said, all right, well, I'll start on my own. I started an office there and kept going. I started as a hobby. And today I got a very big estate, trust company, you know, we got our family trust and all that sort, yeah.
So starting from when you worked for Mt Lyell in Queensland, could you go through in order the jobs and the things you've done for a living?
Well, first it was, as I told you, started with the pick and shove, and then got onto the carpentry, and then we used to show pictures and things like that, you see. And of course, going with the carpentry, then I experienced myself a lot. Then when I went to New Zealand and was in charge there, then when I came back here and was working for the A-Watts for 3.5 years or something like that. I was married then. And then from there, I started on my own. And so I started.
Where were you working for E.A. Watts?
E.A. Watts, the builder, the ICI building and I was the last...
In Melbourne.
Yeah, Melbourne. In ICI building and then the military hospital in Heidelberg. I was the last carpenter to finish there. And the last job to be finished was in the kitchen. And Frank Watts, people used to say he was a very hard boss. But I found it very nice because I always done my day's work. He was hard on those people that want to oblige you on the work. With me, I always done my day's work and gave my day's work to anybody. That's how I always believed, to be honest, in the work. And I finished up being foreman with him. Matter of fact, when I left him to start on my own in Werribee, and building homes in there for the Italians. And I said to him, no, look, Frank, I said, this is what's happening. I'm starting on my own. He said, well, I wish you luck, Don. He said, but if you don't get on or see that you're not making enough money, you want to come to me, don't worry about asking for a job. He said, if you say my name in there, go and start. That's what he thought of me. I believed always in doing the right thing, that's that. If I'm working on a job, it gives my day's work. You see, this is what's happening today here in Australia. People want to get the big money, they don't want to work and all that sort of thing. And that's what's ruining this country.
So in the 40s you worked for Watts?
For your Watts, yeah.
And then?
After the war I started, well, during the war itself, in the weekends, I used to go up to Werribee and do a bit of work for the Italians because they couldn't afford much money. They were just started, which today they are very wealthy people, but they gave me a go. I used to make few bob on the weekend, and which was very handy in the beginning of life, just married and things like that. And I used to get all my vegetable everything for nothing, besides the few bob that I used to make. And they were very family, they were very family type of people, very nice people. I met them there and they done everything for me. And then while I was there, and the war finished, I built my own building and then started building hardware supplies. And that's how I started. And then in 1959, I decided I don't want to work anymore. And I said I had enough to live on, I don't want to work anymore. And then I nearly got sick and then we went to Richmond, bought the property there, sold our properties in there and went to Richmond.
So where were you living after the war?
Well, during the war, we were living in Rosanna, just off Heidelberg, in that area during the war that time. And then when I was doing this little weekend work, we decided to build a house there, and we sold that house and went to live in Werribee. And that's where we lived after the war, till we went to Richmond, of course, 26 years ago.
And during those years, when did you first become aware of Maltese community organisations? I believe in the 30s there was...
Yeah, well, first of all, there was a priest named Father Greg from the society in St Paul. He was a great friend of the family in Malta. And of course, Mum and Dad told him, when you go to Australia, go and see Don and go and see the other boys, And he did come there and he come to our place and we in Werribee and we looked after him. And then he told me that he's going to buy a place in Carlton to start the society moving. And then afterwards, after he been there a few months, we found this place, him and I, number 477 Royal Parade, where the center is now. And he said, well, let's go and see it. So we went and had a good look at it, one thing another. And I said to him, look, don't miss it. It's 200 feet deep land by 100-foot frontage right in the city. And they bought it for £16,000. So I helped them in doing the whole thing and everything. And they bought them, they settled there then. And then, of course, then started the soccer club and all this sort of thing. But again, unfortunately, there was a lot of discontent in the soccer club, and I didn't want any type of things like that. And then the next thing came that they had, after him, when he went back to Malta, and the other priest, there was Father Gallia, which is in the photo.
Excuse me a minute, I'd better change this tape.
Okay.
Do you recall which year Father Grech came to Australia?
Well, he will be well before 55, because in the 55, we organized the Maltese Community Council, which I was elected as treasurer at the time. It was Captain Sivala, was the commissioner for Malta, and Paul Perez, he was the president at the time. But I would say he would be here about 10 years before that.
So it would have been immediately after the war.
Probably, yeah. I don't remember exactly the date. I could check it up and find out, but that's easily done. But then, when we bought this property, all the Maltese used to go there and meet there, you see, whether a soccer club or anything like that, you see. And then after that, when he went to Malta, there was other priests took over, Father Cini, there was Father Sherry, Father Gatt, there was Father Gallia, which they took their time as in charge or something, you see. And
Were they
then,
like priests to the Maltese community?
that's right. And then we had our offer there to from a company. They contacted me that they wanted to buy the property. Meantime, they had a Maltese priest boy that studied here, Father Zamit, who's in America now. And he was the first priest to be ordained in their order in Melbourne. And Father Gallia got very much he done a lot of hard work, that priest, to try and organize the Society of St. Paul here in Victoria. And he said, Don, he said, I like to find a place, he said, where we can expand a bit. He said, and we went and saw places which are very, very expensive. He said, a bit of land, we say an acre, a couple of acres of land, he said, they want £50,000, which was a lot of money then. And he said, there's nothing on it. Then I said, well, Father, I said, your priest is going to be ordained, this young priest, on next Sunday. I said, Sunday after, I'll give you a dinner at our place, fetch him home there. I said, we'll discuss the matter. Give me a week to find out. So at the time, I was going to purchase a farm, 24 acres up in Sunbury, Norton's Lanes. No, I'm sorry, not Sunbury, Glen Waverley.
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry. And I was going to buy this farm. It was a fruit farm, apple farm. It was about 24 acres and had a lovely home on it. And there was a big cool store and all that. And during this time, I said to myself, that will be the idea for them. So I said, look, Father, having lunch, I said, you come with me. And we took him there. I said, I got this. Look, I said, I'm buying it myself. I said, you want it? It's there. They looked at it and they went berserk over it. He said, you couldn't be anything better than that, you see. So, if you cut the story short, they bought the place and they lived in it so many years. Meantime, you know, this 477 is going on all the time. Then we had a company that wanted to buy that, the 477 parade. So they were negotiating with them, you see, and they asked him to go to lunch with them, the intended purchaser. And of course, I knew because the chappie that was purchasing told me, you know, that they're interested, and we introduced the whole business. And I said, well, all right. I said, I'll come with you. And we went there, and he was a smart fella. He brought his solicitor with him to just sign straight away on the having lunch. And I wouldn't let him sign anything. And I said, no. I said, we are going to have lunch, not to talk business. You interested in it? This is the price we want, and then we talk business afterwards. Anyhow, he said, who am I dealing with? The priest or you? She's dealing with me. I said, no, if you don't like it, we'll get up and go on at the table. I said, don't have to sit on this one. And of course, I pulled them in their place, and they sort of never mentioned anything about the business. First of all, I considered that was very bad manners to get a solicitor with them, priest to know nothing about legal matters, and I said, I thought that gave me a very bad impression at the time, but they finished up right. So after negotiating of the whole business, they agreed and everything, and the offer was, I think, if I remember well, it was 640,000. That's, and I said, when they agreed to it, you know, through a lot of negotiation with Malta, because they couldn't do anything here, couldn't agree. So they gave him paid the deposit. They gave us the 2 houses in Sydney Road, you know, several days there, and apartment in cash as a deposit. And after a while, the deal fell off. So they gained all that. So we gained them properties and gained the deposit and everything. And I told him, because Father Sherry, one that died, you know, the people that was killed, him and I went to school together. And we, like Papa brothers, get together and talk these things. Don't do that, Father. Do this. What do you think, Don? I said, do it this way. I said, we'll get them. I said, we're not dead. I said, if they want it, the deal is there. If they don't want it, that's their business. So there was a bit of a recession. They was going to build 12-story office blocks in there. There went a bit of a recession, and they went flat. So they couldn't carry on with the contract. So the society was important thought of us. So that's how it is.
Early 60s, was it?
Oh, well, I can't remember the dates, you see. Well, it'll be after that, because this, in 1955, is when the Maltese Community Council was formed. That's the first meeting we had in that. That's what you're looking at. And it will be after that. It'll be probably 5 years, right after 60, I think. Because in 1960, there were Father Abela and Father Borge of Deer Park were ordained in the ordinary diocese, you see. And I know it because I was involved in their ordination, you see. I know them well. But it will be after that.
Did you know, presume you knew Father Chanta?
Oh, yes, Father Chanta. Of course I knew him. He is a very smart man. He done a lot of work for Sunbury's college. When he took over there, and I think a few years, 2 or 3 years, he cleared all their debts, about £30,000. He done a lot of hard work. He was a hard-working man. He used to be in Sydney Road, at the boys' home. Don Bosco. Oh, he done a lot of hard work. He was a very active person. You see, I remember Corder. Frank Corder. He was to be tremendous. And
you said early on that you said early on, when we came in today, that you was going to be trained for a priest. Is that right?
That's in Malta, though. That's before I left Malta. That wasn't there when I left school. And then, being so poor, I had to go and work to get that 10 shillings a week, or 8 shillings, whatever it was, and used to go at night and study. So really, I studied Italian well, and the Latin. I went as far as the Syntaxi in Latin. You see, and I was doing well. But then I found out that the priest had to give me a penny to go on the tram, and this and that, and the poverty. I said, blow it all. I said, I'm going to work. And that's what pulled me off it. You see, but these priests that the Society of St Paul, I know them all. I really always have been the man behind the screen. I never sort of, you see me there whether they got a concert, and I always kept behind the screen. If they want something that's worthwhile having, and I can do it, I used to do it.
I want to naturally give mention to Father Chantar and people like Frank Corder and so on.
Oh,
Can
yes.
you give me any anecdotal sort of information about
Yeah,
them?
well, I'll tell you. Father Chanta, for a start, when I came here, I was only young and didn't have the sort of thinking of take notes of him, look for future references and
No.
things like that, you see. But he was one of the blokes with my elder brother to start the soccer, the George Cross soccer, something like that after the World War, you know, and things like that. And all I know that he used to be very, very active, and he'll make sure that a pound to be collected, he'll collect it for the church, of course, for his the work he's doing, which was very, very good. And Corder, he was a terrific person. Corder was a person that he'll do anything for the Maltese. When he used to come to us, Tasmania, he always used to come and see us. And he was, I say, he was more Maltese than he was anything else. Corder was tremendous. He was absolutely great. And then there was Captain Courtney after that, you see. So I came in Captain Courtney's time.
But there was actually a Mr. Potts too, who was commissioner for a very brief period.
Yeah, well, I don't remember him. But Mr. Corder, he was tremendous. He had a legal practice.
That's right.
And he was tremendous. He was a nice man. He loved the Maltese and fought for us. He done everything.
What were some of the battles he waged for the Maltese?
Well,
What sort of issues?
Anything at all. You see, again, I was too young to... But you hear, say, if you're in trouble, you hear from the Maltese. Corder fight for you, Corder help you. See, that's the way I knew him, you know.
What about Captain Courtney? He's one.
Captain,
very important.
yeah, Captain Courtney was, I knew him because when I left Malta, he was in charge of Malta then of the immigration. And then he gave me a few tips before I came here, what to do, which will help, you see, every bit helps like that. And then he said, I hope one day I'll come there and take post in there. And he did. And I went to see him. Every time we used to come to Melbourne, we go to see him, you know. And he was a very nice chap, you know.
He served in World War I, I believe.
Well, I don't know much about that, because I was too young, as I told you. Born in 1911, so 14 is
Yes.
starting the war, till 18. So I would have been about 7 years when the war was finished. So I still remember the war, though, in Malta. I still remember the soldiers traveling there, that we had no food, things like that. Just.
Do you remember, like when you were in Australia, did you ever hear, say, the older Maltese people here talking about the New Caledonia incident? You know, when the ship, the Gange, came with 200 Maltese on board, and Billy Hughes wouldn't let them land.
Oh, I got a very fake idea of it, you see. And when talking Billy Hughes' time, it was a long time. I was only a little bit of a lad, you know. I wasn't much interested in politics or things like that. All I interesting that to work, make a bit of money, and one day go and live well off in Malta. That, you know, as a young chap, you get that idea first, you know. But I remember Billy Hughes and all that, but I remember most of them, but couldn't tell you much about him because I've never been interested in politics. Lang there and all them. But the best, in 56 years in Australia, the best Prime Minister I ever met. I met him myself on several occasions, and the best Prime Minister I ever met was Menzies. There's nobody could beat Menzies. And then next to him, I would say Ben Chifley. Ben Chifley was the first Labour Prime Minister in my time here. And he was very honest man. He was very Labour man. He wasn't, you say, communist or any left wing or any of this nonsense. He was a very, matter of fact, when he was elected, he was a very strong man. A few weeks after, the wharfies strike for more money and conditions, all this sort of thing. And he said to them, he said, it was only radio at the time. He said to them, he said, go back. He said, then I'll see what I can do. Meter. And they refused to go back. He said, now you elected me as your prime minister, as your boss, to tell you what to do. He said, now you're telling me what to do. He said, I'm giving you 24 hours. It's up to you. They didn't go back. He put the military on the wharf. And then he made another speech. He said, don't think that I put the military on that wharf to take your jobs. The military are in there to fill up the gap till you're ready to go in. When you're ready to go in, I'll pull them out. And I remember they went back in a couple of weeks after or something like that with the same terms of condition that they had. And this is what Australia needs, strong men like that. Menzies kept Australia together in one piece. Ever since Menzies went, to me, Australia seems to flop down. When Menzies was alive, Australia seemed to be one body. If you had a pound in your pocket, you had got a pound. What is it because of having thousands of dollars in your, if they're not worthless? We're coming like Italy, like the Italian lira, which you want a coffee, you want 1,000 lira to have a cup of coffee. I mean, yeah, but Menzies and Ben Chifley were the best two prime ministers I've ever met in Australia.
Talking of Chifley, during the war, were the Maltese very active in like fundraising?
Oh, tremendous. But what we did, you see, this was asked to me many years ago. You see, today, they create sort of fundraising and one thing and another for any project at all. But it seems to me that by the time the actual project gets it, they only get about 1/3 of what they collect. You know, say for the hospital, these people that carry on with the tins. The bloke that got the tins, he gets 15%. The bloke that organizing, he gets 25%. All that sort of thing. In that time, our idea of collection things for Malta, for the war, we used to get a group. We say, in Tasmania, it doesn't know, my brother used to be in charge, and say, well, all right, anybody who's got anything to go here. It used to go direct. There's a committee, there's the receipts, everything there, and it goes direct. With their money, with their food, we sent quite a lot of parcels of food during the war. But not with a lot of fuss, or making an Australian-wide collection where people can take that money down. You look at Freedom from Hunger some time back. See, there's none of that. What we used to collect and everything used to go to them direct. We sent quite a lot to Malta. We had quite a lot of fundraising, but for them purpose only, not with intention, no matter how hungry or how poor the people were. That it was a really sin if you had to even look at that. Or anybody touches that goes direct to them. I remember that well. And the war we sent quite a lot of parcels and money and things like that.
Do you recall whether, when did the community here begin things like celebrating the festivals and...
Only recently, not very long ago, it's only recently. Although, this is funny, a Maltese, as I said in that paper that even they were in literature, they couldn't speak or write Maltese or English, no language at all. They always celebrated their Mass. They always went for Mass. They used to say their rosary in Maltese, and they used to pray in Maltese. Why the priest say it in English? But they never messed, they stuck to their religion. Now, even in Tasmania, when we say St Helens comes along, we always used to have a statue, a few candles, and we all celebrate there as a little party to the St Helens. That always has been celebrated. And St George, we had a bloke there, very, very in love with the feast. So he brought the statue, about that big from Malta, sent for it, and we had this, and he gave a party. When we say a party, a few beers and a few meal, like meat, and a real friendly party to celebrate the feast.
In Queenstown?
In Queenstown. But that used to be practically where there's a group of Maltese, they always used to celebrate that little individually, quietly, not like they do today with the band and all that. There was no such a thing as band. Maltese bands, what I mean.
Yeah, another thing I like to ask is, the question I was going to ask is it true that when the war started here, the Australians and others thought that the shops were owned by Italian and not Maltese, and they smashed their shops and things like that?
There was that they all owned by Italians, not Maltese. That wasn't true, because there were Italians that had fish and chip shop and little eat places, cheap eating places, and things like that. And I have to talk about the Italians in Tasmania on the west coast. And I can tell you this, that when the Italians were rounded up, in Tasmania, in Queenstown, the police went and they were all good living people. I lived amongst them. They know different than us. They were very, very good people. And the first thing they said to the police, their spokesman, they rounded them up to put them in the concentration camp or whatever it may be. And they had to take them to Hobart, by the way. They had nowhere to keep in Tasmania. So one of them said to them, he said, to the sergeant, which I knew personally, he said, look, he said, Sergeant, give us an hour, please, so we can go and pay our bills before we go away. And they went and paid and the sergeant of police was surprised and said, yes, you can go, without anything at all. And they went and paid out all their debts, which used to be, say you buy the store, you pay at the end of the week on payday. So they went and paid everybody, and it's part of the history of Queenstown. If you ever go there, you'll find all about this. They paid everybody before they went into camp. And that is, people were different. What there was, it's exactly the same feeling about the Vietnamese today. How do you think of the Vietnamese thinking that, what they talking about the Vietnamese today? They used to think in the old days the same thing about Europeans. And the most people they hated were the Poms. The Australians hated the Poms. Then, of course, Italian, Maltese, and Greeks were all one. You all painted with the same color, say you're Dago, black, so-and-so, you see? But they worked out of that. And they became to love Maltese, Italians. Everybody's sitting down. Now, today is the same thing happening today on the Vietnamese.
Yes. Well, I think what Dad was asking, though, what he had in mind, were Maltese ever confused for Italians during the war? When the war was on?
To meet them in the street. Not exactly, the police knows who you are, whether you're Maltese or Italian. You got your passport with you, we used to have the British passport. And we were very, with the law, we were very highly looked for, yeah. And well, in the street, you can hardly tell the difference between a Greek, Maltese, or Italian, can you? With the exception of get people like us. Well, I can tell you're not Italian, you can tell I'm not Italian. But when I speak to you through my pidgin English, you know exactly I'm Maltese. So if you see a Frenchman, you can tell whether he's Frenchman. But now...
that's what I was after. I heard that when the war started, the Australians and Anglo-Saxons, anyway, I would say, they smashed shops that they were owned by Maltese, thinking that they were Italians. Did that happen? Do you know?
Well, probably it did happen here in Melbourne, and it did not happen on the West Coast, but not where no, it did not happen there. It probably happened here in the city. But then you get that maniac, the ignorant chap, whether he's an Australian, Maltese, or anything else, that take that action, yes. And that's what caused that, not exactly through the government.
And over the years, did you assist other Maltese to come to Australia?
In which way, assistant? Financially or what?
Well, with helping with accommodation, sponsoring them, You know, they may have written to you and said, we want to come out.
Very
Can you
few,
give
very
advice?
few. Might be, or might end up in Australia, might be 5 or 6, but people that I knew personally. You see, when you make accommodation, especially when you're married, you can't make accommodation when you're married. You've got a family. You know, don't worry about. But if there is a place where I can place a member or help him, I did that a lot. And I did a lot of work for Maltese that did not know what to do to fetch their people. I did a lot of that to help them to get their own people here.
That would be after the war, would it?
Or after the war, because during the war there wasn't any immigration at all. You take sugar? I'm sorry.
No. In summary, what would you describe as the main hardships that migrants from Malta experienced?
Well, what time? There's a difference
both
between,
times, say the
in the
30s.
beginning, is very hard regarding work, yes. Today is a lot easier, because when you land here, you certainly come here to some sort of relation, which you're helped for the first few weeks, and then the government pops in and gives you the social money, unemployment relief, and all that sort of thing. But at that time, we didn't have it. At that time, during the Depression, they used to give people, married people, a day or 2 work during the week at 5 shillings a day. And matter of fact, the war service, the war building memorial in St Kilda Road, that was built on the dough, on that 5 shillings a day. I remember it from the first day it was started, it was finished. They used to send people there to put their a couple of days' work there, and they give them 10 shillings.
On the shrine.
On the shrine. That is, I remember, that went up with the dough. Ask anybody with the dough money.
And finally, a question that I ask all the interviewees. Do you regard yourself as Maltese or as an Australian?
Well, that's funny again. And a very interesting question. Last time I went overseas with the Member of Parliament, Mr. Guinevere, before he died, we went there and spent 8 weeks. And I was in America, we were interviewed in Newfoundland, in Canada, Toronto, and all them places, and we've been asked different questions. And that question was asked to me in Malta. And they put it up to me this way. He said, how long you been in Malta? I told him so many years. He said, now tell us, who do you love best, Malta or Australia? I said, that's the best question. Again, now, funny it comes here today. Well, I consider Malta as my mother, and I love her like my mother. But Australia is my wife. I sleep and live with her. That's exactly how I felt. I said it then, and I say it again.
Right, thank you very much.